Let me ask the first question that our scholar might have, those who are interested in the Star Scholars Network. How do emerging scholar researchers develop their research agenda? Can you share some examples and strategies for, say, someone who is engaging in a wide range of publishing opportunities but does not yet have a focused agenda?
We have provided some extensive material in the module that colleagues can read. I want to just highlight some of the broader points here. There is a productive tension between publishing in a lot of different possible interesting areas and then focusing on a particular area and becoming an expert, a specialist on that particular topic. I see that tension as productive because sometimes when you are exploring possibilities, you're actually gathering materials, gathering steam, finding your network, your opportunities, and strengthening your foundation. However, it is also extremely important to begin to carve your path, find your groove, and develop a set of questions, or maybe a single question, the broader question that will drive your research. And that is particularly important because you want to contribute not only something valuable, something unique to your field of study, you also want to contribute something relevant, meaningful, impactful to your society. For example, if there is a scientist who is asking this question, how does a particular virus transfer under a certain range of temperatures? It is a solid question. But then that scientist may also be interested in providing a broader context and perspective to the application of that knowledge, or maybe asking a broader question or addressing a broader pandemic or whatever problem that they want to tackle in society as a leading scientist, right? So in that situation, then the asking of why do I want to do this, the asking of what does it contribute to society, the asking of how do I lead the conversation in my field, how do I become a leading voice in the field, is what should emerge gradually, but also deliberately and without taking too much or infinite amount of time. That can be done by reading up and continuing to be a consumer of scholarship in your field, research in your field, but also starting to deliberately become a producer of knowledge in your field. And as a producer of knowledge, asking that this next question is, how can I apply this knowledge, or at least how can I make an impact in the understanding of this issue in my society? And that pattern of inquiry, that desire to focus, that desire to find a purpose, that desire to make an impact should also be reinforced by not only asking questions, but also by networking with people, by understanding the bigger picture, not through simply studying the literature of the topic, but also by talking to people, collaborating, networking, and connecting with different stakeholders. And once you do this, it becomes easier for you to position yourself in relation to the world, in relation to the discipline, in relation to the people, to the challenges and where you want to be. And so I would just highlight, look at this productive tension. Don't go one way or another. Don't forever become a scattered researcher, or don't narrow down too much. Use the productive attention in your favor by asking the questions and by giving yourself a timeline by which you are going to reach these milestones.
So another question we might want to ask is the following. I'd like to ask my colleague Amina, how can an emerging scholar who does have an intellectual agenda also develop a clear vision for social impact? Can scholars start developing their research agenda with a socially driven vision in the first place? Amina?
Thanks for the question. I come from the worldview that, I think, and this is an increasingly accepted worldview, that we live in a large, interconnected, interdependent world. So I think we need to kind of let go of that idea of, finding something as being social versus something else. I think these are all kind of interrelated. So I believe that, any kind of research agenda that we pick up has a connection to society and does have a social dimension to it. So when we're kind of building a research agenda, I think what is important is to kind of think of the rationale. When we're building the rationale, why does it matter? What's the purpose? And traditionally in our research methodology teachings, we focus a lot on the intellectual rationale, the knowledge gap. And I think one of the things we need to start doing at is look kind of beyond that. Why does this issue matter and who does it matter for. So looking at the broader significance, not just the intellectual or the knowledge contribution, but also the social contribution of our work. And I think that practice, how do we do that? I mean, in my teaching, I encourage students to kind of go out, and I think this is kind of reaffirms, kind of adds on to what Shyamji has just said, is to kind of be more engaged in the context and learn more about the context, not just through reading. Like I teach in Nepal, and so a lot of the questions that my students come is, there's not enough literature written about Nepal, so how do I know? And just go out there, interview people, do interview. You don't have to wait for the research to happen. So how do you learn more and more about the context? That is one aspect. But I think to have a socially driven mission to your research, it also also have to consider the how of your research. What methodologies do you employ? Because it's not just about how you start and how you end, it's about how you do your research, and you have to it has to be embedded in how you do your research, and it kind of connects to research ethics. And I know that's another topic for another day. But what kind of language you use, how you engage with your participants, or the people that are involved in your research, and then ultimately, how do you then disseminate your research? What methods you use. I think we do talk a lot about publishing, and then publishing is valorized a lot. It's the privileged way to do dissemination, but we also need to find alternative ways if we are to create. We need to kind of diversify, let's say, that's probably a better word, of how we share our knowledge and our research to a wider community as possible, especially those who are going to be most impacted by our research, the community, the policymakers, the institutions. So all these things, I think, will kind of, if you kind of pay attention to all these things, that will kind of help you quite a fair bit in making sure that your research has a social impact or socially driven mission kind of embedded into the research itself.
That is such a thought-provoking set of perspectives, because I was thinking, as you were highlighting, the importance of looking at how do we approach and how do you engage in scholarship, and how do you disseminate that knowledge, and how do you engage in the community that is the stakeholder for that knowledge. Because I think that if we're all considering the academic journal article to be only scholarship, I don't think we're going to really make scholarship socially impactful, because society doesn't really consume that knowledge or disseminate or exchange or mobilize that knowledge. We would need to diversify the genres and methods and stakeholders and informants and collaborators and languages involved. And luckily we have the second module where this will come up prominently. But I really love how you pointed out, it's important to stop seeing something as scholarship in a very limited manner. If we only see a certain type of data and a certain type of genre and a certain type of venue and certain type of audience as scholarship, then we're not going to make a social impact. It's by simply tweaking the research question and research method and agenda, it's not going to work. We might actually need to rethink the whole landscape. We now might, even within the same regimes of scholarship, right? We might need to rethink what scholarship is in the first place, and how to do it, and what to do with it, if we want to make an impact, right?
Yeah,
not,
I mean,
yeah.
if I may add, because the dominant language that we use in higher education is English, and so we kind of impose that criteria. I mean, I can speak for the place where I teach, Kathmandu University, that the mode of instruction is English, and so students are required to, and all the scholars, and even faculty, all of us, we read and write in English. But then, when we engage with policymakers, Nepali is the language, so so language does become, and it's not just the language, but it's also the kind of the mode of language. It's like, because we use academic language. So how do you do that? But I think the universities here also have to have that kind of mechanism and space to create diverse modes of knowledge dissemination. And I think as academics, people who are kind of within institutions, how do we make that possible for all of us? I think that's more of an institutional issue. I won't go into that right now.
I get to ask another question, and I would like to ask Nella to answer that question. One other dimension of making a greater impact through your scholarship research is to make it more multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. How could an emerging scholar who is good at or starting to be good at, something very specific and something very deep down in the discipline, get out of that silo and connect with other scholars in advancing transdisciplinary research, and what implications might that have for greater social impact? Nella?
I think emerging scholars in particular, but all of us, we seem to feel this incredible need to sort of legitimize and reify and our disciplinary spaces, identities, and even languages. And somehow we seem to also even embrace that isolation that comes from within the confines of those disciplinary perspectives and practices. And so it's interesting because I think the idea of coming outside of those silos, especially to do research that has social impact, may at first seem really challenging and almost counter to the very idea of being a scholar who is specializing at this sort of hyper micro level. In order to come out of this, what for me is disciplinary isolation and a kind of disenchantment that might come with that is to think strategically in a very deliberate way, seek to advance an interdisciplinary agenda. To begin with the idea that an interdisciplinary agenda, by its very definition, is one that is going to bring us outward, to expand, to take us to new spaces, to new stakeholders, to new communities, to speak new languages, and to examine and explore new ways of doing, which, and new ways of making impact, which I would argue is the purpose of research. And so I want to be practical and offer some suggestions. One suggestion is to really take a serious and clear look at your disciplinary interests and to very explicitly look for intersections with other disciplines. In a very explicit and deliberate way. Look for the gaps. Spend time in that liminal space of the gaps to think about how you and others in other disciplines might fill that gap. Then I think the next, another suggestion following would be, after you've explored these intersections, begin to identify a clear social impact issue or problem or challenge that your research may help address in real, practical, local, and global contexts. You begin with the local, but you begin to think about the local and global connections. And then I think we need to be very deliberate in building, and very, very deliberate to build relationships outside of our disciplines, by attending and going into spaces outside of our disciplines, by contacting and connecting with partners, informal and then perhaps formalizing those relationships. I want to point out that interdisciplinary work requires a level of compassion, I think, of imagination, of creativity, of understanding that frankly, we don't find working within our own disciplines sort of myopic view. And when I think about compassion and imagination, creativity, understanding, these are the very soft skills that are needed to advance the very work that we're doing, the kind of how that Amina was speaking about, the how we do. We need these soft skills to advance the work of interdisciplinary research agendas. And then I'd like to propose that we not be afraid of what I call the broad strokes. In other words, the disciplinary issues, ideas, and challenges that are bringing us together in the first place, thinking more broadly. I suggest we kind of step back and explore what these transdisciplinary contributions are bringing to the table in these broad strokes, broader ways. And then I think it would be really interesting to then, again, and I continue to use this word deliberate, to deliberately agree to work toward a common lexicon, a common language, so that you can begin to develop a research project that respects the common ground, the common goals, and the common aspirations of the team, but also leverages the differences, the new elements, the new ways of thinking, the new, leverages the differences in synthesizing and creating ideas, new ideas, creating new paradigms, new structures, new ways of doing this work, new ways of thinking about the work, new frameworks, new dispositions. I apply the steps that I just outlined for myself, and it really led me to bring two areas that were at one point in my research very, very separated, and I felt like I was two different people. So I was in the sort of social applied linguistics, direct comp translingualism on the one hand, and on the other hand, looking at rights and rights-based lens and human rights and peace studies and IR. But it was in really deliberately deciding that I was going to cross those disciplinary liminal spaces. And I appreciate that Sam talked about, really leveraging tensions. So I began with that review of my interests, with exploring the intersections, with deliberately building relationships outside my discipline, with not being afraid to speak in broad strokes, to distance myself from my disciplinary lexicon, and to really getting excited about working toward a common language and a common goal. And so, I was able to do that, and I want to share that with all of you, because, it's so easy to feel that we can't be interdisciplinary, because by definition, that's not what how we're trained or how we're asked to think about our own identities, our own positionalities, our own spaces, our own work, and our teaching and research agendas.
Thank you, Nela.
So thank you for that question.
I love it that getting behind a cause may automatically demand interdisciplinary approach rather than having to force transdisciplinary approach. Krishna, would you like to add some thoughts, perspectives, examples?
Yeah, while Nela was talking about that, I was also, thinking particularly in the context of the global warming and pandemics, people have gone beyond their disciplinary perspectives. And probably this is the biggest example that recently educators have got the point to sort of awareness in their discipline, why they should work in more transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary perspective to look into these bigger issues of our societies. And also this will leverage your skills of expanding your research skills, when you do the teamwork, in different countries or in different institutional contexts. This gives you the new perspective. And we often say think outside the box, but we never implement in our everyday life of doing research and in academia. The other challenges could be also the way the department are formed, the way our discipline has been immersed over the years. We never got a chance to look into the other departments and their research activities. Recently, even I've been working with many scholars from different countries and contexts, and it has given an aha moment just to look into the same topics from the different perspective, different research and methodological views. It is eye-opening and it's beautiful. So I truly appreciate Nela broaden our research agendas.
It's exactly in those disciplinary gaps that historically we have seen around the world the most impactful movements, new disciplines, new ways of thinking. And one of my favorite jokes that I often use in classroom when I push students to move beyond disciplinary boundaries is asking them to think of, how many people have an iPhone, and I'm like, well, who did that? Who's responsible for your iPhone? Apple, of course. And then I go back and remind them that it was Steve Jobs who, with his love of beauty, that came from his interest in calligraphy, Chinese and Japanese calligraphy. And so he actually did something that at the time was unheard of, which is to create a beautiful piece of technology. We take it for granted now, but he's known, or he and his company are known for precisely that kind of transdisciplinary move, that kind of transdisciplinary turn. I really, invite you and kind of challenge you to do that for the reasons that I think we've been discussing over the importance of this work. And so thank you again, Amina, Sam, and Krishna.
And to begin to wrap up, I'd like to ask the final question of Professor Hammond. The overall objective of this training program is to support scholars as they advance a strong intellectual agenda, which may serve society best if its social vision is also clearly developed. Equally important is the third dimension, the objective of leveraging such a research agenda to substantively advance social justice, depending on the discipline, specialization, context, and personal vision and expertise of the scholar. How do our social justice responsibilities shape the development of our research agenda? I'm asking this while defining social justice in a broad sense as involving equality or equity, common good or well-being, and most importantly, environmental justice today, using a rights-based approach to our scholarship. Gene.
I come to this panel as an old man, first and foremost. And I think it's significant because my field has changed so many times in the course of my career. Each time the field changes, it gives us an opportunity to change. The first thing that comes to my mind is that most of us get into this profession because we like to teach or because we want to teach. And the scholarship sort of comes second. We realize that in order to teach at a university level, we need to do scholarship. The impulse to teach is, I think, essentially an ethical impulse. And it often includes social justice as part of it. Could include climate issues, earth issues. So you get into this profession because you want to share your ideas with other people because you think your ideas are good ones and hopefully ethical ones. Then it seems to me that your research agenda starts getting shaped by what makes you mad in your profession. When you are working in the field and you see people doing things that either are not effective for students or are irrelevant to students or are irrelevant to the world outside academia, or for example, scholarship that's not applicable to everyday life, that is the impulse that guides us to, or that pushes us toward doing a different kind of more socially relevant research. Be ready for the surprises in your career, and as long as the social justice is in the back of your head, as I assume it's in all of ours, otherwise we wouldn't be involved in this project, there will be opportunities.
What kind of competencies do we need to do the kind of work that we're talking about? How do we develop those competencies? Where do we learn that those skills? Because I think I was kind of wondering, I think that is where, and I was kind of reflecting on, why is that the case? Is it the education system, or is it the way society has evolved? When Professor Hammond said, it's like your research agenda, it kind of develops through what you get mad at, and what if people are not getting mad enough, and how do you, because I think we've become so desensitized and we've become so focused on just getting things done in a straitjacketed way that how do we even reach that state? That's one thing, but the other thing is then the idea of self-care. How do you also then survive, thrive within the system where you're probably better off being more desensitized and not being mad? How do you balance those two? I think because that's been an issue that I've been struggling with lately. So that was my thought.
If I could chip in, I like to talk about percentages. I think if we think of ourselves as being 60% of our time devoted to the good of the world and 40% of the time devoted to our own good, that works out pretty well, because if you devote yourself to the good of the world, a lot of that will spill over into helping your own career. But you do have to, I think, as Amina was just suggesting, you do have to protect yourself in this field in order to stay in the field, and in order if you want to continue to have an influence in the world. So you have to keep in mind, I think, some kind of percentage that you are going to devote to your own survival, independent of your working on social justice or any other ethical issue.
I love that, because I'm thinking about it in a context that Amina is pointing to, which is the spread of this neoliberal publication machine that gives you credit for doing whatever you publish, regardless of whatever it is valuable for your society or not. the citation and the indexes and the medium of publication and the venues of publication and where it was published. But then as a scholar, you might be like, I'm a potato farmer. I need to make sure that people, farmers and families across the country in which, let's say, potato grows on a massive proportion, potatoes eaten, say Ireland, or wheat. Let's say that scientist is interested in advancing the food security of her community, but the university doesn't care, right? The university cares about some sort of recycling of knowledge about wheat that has nothing to do with the improvement of the wheat production or wheat safety. And that can really get you mad. And I'm thinking, on the one hand, if to use Jean's percentages, I was thinking maybe it's not either or. Maybe you can, satisfy the citation machine to some extent while also pursuing your passion. And in fact, at some point, if you become so good at it, the citation machine will have to follow you instead of you chasing the citation machine. So it's not either or. So don't get mad to a point where you're thinking, I can't do what I want and they won't value what I want, right? I think at some point, if you care enough, you're going to develop a research agenda that is not one-dimensional. A research agenda that may have whatever is popular in the current discourse, where you can get published and the way the gatekeepers will be happy. But at the same time, maybe some other publication or another dimension of that same project where you could probably integrate some of the things that you want to integrate, or maybe ask a second question, or maybe do a follow-up, or maybe do a publication, but then take that publication and put into these other venues, other genres, other languages, other communities, other applications, so that you use that same publication as a tool that can do many things. I think at the end of the day, it comes back to what we're saying here. Have something that drives you kind of angry. That is good for your creativity. That is good for but not so angry that it hurts you because you become so depressed and so angry all the time because the world is burning and you can't do anything. You're just this emerging scholars in the corner of the world.
Well, Professor Sharma and Professor Hammond has given a clear example, and Amina has given a great example from Nepal in a global context. The institutional climate is something different, and we have to have a balance for the both emerging and the senior scholars. I would go with the change making process is not that easy, but you are the change. You can be the change of the society in your research agenda. It's a slow process. It takes time to change the culture of the department or institution, as well as the culture of the research and productivity. This is a good example of how we have been empowering our colleagues, and we are also giving the ideas and sharing our experience and expertise that, writing and publication in top tier venues are not the only thing that we do in academia. We have many areas of interest that we love. We definitely follow the protocols of the university institutions, the requirement. At the same time, we also have other areas of agenda interest that we have to pursue them. And you definitely find the love and the aha moment in your research process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really hope that this really engaging conversation is inspiring all of you to think very much about your own research agendas, about the social impact that you have outlined, that you have aspired to bring you to the kind of places and spaces that many of our colleagues on this panel have shared with you, the kinds of spaces, the languages, the stakeholders, the community members that could be impacted by the work that you're hoping to do to get yourself out of the library and out into the world. I hope that this has given you an opportunity to think about not only the rights that you have as a researcher to do your work and to go out in the world, but also the responsibilities that you have to make that leap from the research, the agenda, the outlining, to real, deep, lasting impact for your local and global communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, colleague, for your contribution. Thank you, those who are watching.